Imagine waking up tomorrow, opening your eyes, looking around your room, recognizing every object exactly where you left it, and yet, somehow, knowing that none of it proves reality exists. Not your bedroom, not your memories, not even the person you've spent your entire life believing yourself to be. After all, consciousness feels like the most obvious thing in existence. Nothing seems more certain than the simple fact that you are conscious. And yet, for thousands of years, the greatest philosophers, scientists, neuroscientists, and mystics have all collided with exactly the same mystery. Not, how does the brain work? But something far more unsettling. Why isn't your brain simply processing information like a computer? Despite centuries of scientific progress, we still don't know. We've mapped distant galaxies billions of light years away. We've built machines capable of learning, reasoning, even creating. We've identified billions of neurons communicating through electrical signals inside the brain. Some scientists believe it emerges from the incredible complexity of the brain. Others suggest consciousness may be more fundamental than matter itself. Some philosophers argue that reality is not something we perceive, but something our minds construct. And others wonder whether consciousness isn't produced at all, but simply received, like a radio tuning into an invisible signal that was always there, because consciousness isn't merely another scientific problem waiting to be solved. And perhaps the greatest mistake we've ever made was believing consciousness is a single state. What if every night, without realizing it, you travel through entirely different forms of awareness? What if dreams, deep sleep, self-awareness, and even the silent observer behind your thoughts are all parts of a much larger landscape that most people never explore? Across cultures, across centuries, from neuroscience laboratories to ancient philosophical traditions, one remarkable pattern continues to appear. Each layer reveals a different relationship between the mind, reality, and the self. Tonight, we're going to explore those hidden layers together, not to impose a single theory, but to examine one of the greatest mysteries humanity has ever encountered. From the complete absence of experience during deep sleep, to the astonishing possibility that awareness itself may be more fundamental than the physical world, we'll travel through 7 levels of consciousness, each stranger than the last. And somewhere along this journey, you may begin asking a question that changes everything. Not, what is consciousness? But, who or what is actually having my experiences? Because perhaps the greatest mystery in the universe has never been somewhere out there among the stars. Perhaps it has been quietly looking through your eyes, your entire life. Level 1. The silent void. Every night, without fear, without hesitation, you willingly disappear. Not physically. Your body remains in bed, and yet, the person you spend every waking hour protecting simply vanishes. Then morning arrives, and you return with the strange conviction that you are the same individual who fell asleep the night before. If your conscious experience disappeared, what preserved the continuity of your existence? This simple question has puzzled philosophers for centuries. It is the only state every healthy human experiences almost every day, yet almost no one can describe. Modern neuroscience identifies this period as slow-wave sleep, dominated by delta brainwaves, the slowest electrical rhythms produced by the human brain. The nervous system enters its deepest restorative mode. It is performing some of the most important maintenance processes required for survival. And yet, The vivid inner movie we call conscious experience has almost completely disappeared. If the brain is still active, why does subjective experience nearly vanish? Some researchers argue that consciousness requires large-scale communication between distant brain regions. During deep sleep, that communication becomes dramatically reduced. Information continues flowing, but it no longer forms the unified experience we call awareness. Others believe consciousness may not disappear completely. Instead, it may withdraw into a state too subtle to be remembered later, and perhaps that uncertainty is more fascinating than certainty itself, because every night you enter a condition where the story of your life is temporarily suspended. Imagine if someone asked you to describe where you were between 2 and 4 o'clock this morning. This question leads us directly into philosophy. John Locke argued that personal identity depends on memory. If memory creates identity, then who are you during dreamless sleep? David Hume went further. He claimed that when he searched for the self, he never found a permanent observer. If every experience disappears during deep sleep, what remains? More recently, some philosophers have suggested something even stranger. Perhaps what disappears is not consciousness itself, but the contents of consciousness. It stitches together countless fragments until a familiar voice quietly says, "I'm back." But is it really the same you? Or is your mind rebuilding the same story, day after day, with astonishing precision? Neuroscience shows that memory itself is not a perfect recording. Every time you remember something, your brain slightly reconstructs it. Perhaps the self isn't a fixed object hidden somewhere inside the brain. Every morning, your brain assembles billions of pieces into a coherent narrative. But deep sleep quietly reminds us of something profoundly unsettling. The person you believe yourself to be can disappear completely and still return. Maybe identity is less like a statue carved in stone and more like a wave rising from the ocean. And if consciousness can dissolve so completely every night, what else about your experience might only be temporary? Because once you begin questioning the permanence of the self, another mystery immediately appears. If consciousness can create nothing, can it also create entire worlds? The answer may be waiting inside your dreams. Level 2. The Dream Architect. Every night, after the silence of deep sleep, something extraordinary begins to happen. Without opening your eyes, without moving a single muscle, without receiving a single image from the outside world, your brain becomes an architect. From absolute darkness, it builds an entire universe. Faces you've never consciously seen begin speaking to you. Entire lifetimes unfold, sometimes within only a few minutes. Experience emotions so intense, they linger long after you wake. Your body responds, as though the experience were happening in the physical world. Because from the brain's perspective, the difference between imagined experience and external experience is far smaller than we once believed. During REM sleep, the stage most closely associated with vivid dreaming, the brain becomes astonishingly active. Emotional centers, particularly the amygdala, become highly engaged. Meanwhile, parts of the prefrontal cortex responsible for logical reasoning and critical judgment become less active. Your imagination accelerates, while your skepticism goes offline. That is why impossible events feel completely normal inside dreams. You don't stop to ask, "How am I breathing underwater?" Or, "Why am I talking to someone who died years ago?" The questioning mind is temporarily quieter. For decades, scientists believed dreams were little more than random electrical activity interpreted by the brain. Dreaming appears to play important roles in emotional regulation, memory integration, creative problem solving, and even threat simulation. Some researchers propose that dreams allow the brain to rehearse dangerous situations without real-world consequences. Others believe dreams help reorganize memories, connecting distant experiences into entirely new patterns. This may explain why solutions to difficult problems sometimes appear after sleep. The sleeping brain continues working, even when conscious effort has stopped. The chemist Auguste Kekulé famously described discovering the ring structure of benzene after dreaming of a snake biting its own tail. Composer Paul McCartney awoke with the melody that became Yesterday already playing in his mind. Many artists, scientists, writers, and inventors have credited dreams with insights that seemed impossible while awake. It is almost as though consciousness becomes more creative when the rules of ordinary reality temporarily disappear. But perhaps the most astonishing feature of dreaming is not creativity. You might immediately answer, "My brain." But that explanation hides another mystery, because within the dream, you are simultaneously the writer, the director, the actors, the scenery, the laws of physics, the weather, the dialogue, the emotions, and the observer experiencing all of it. Yet one part of that same intelligence becomes convinced it is only one character inside the story. Imagine writing an entire novel, forgetting you wrote it, then entering the pages, believing yourself to be only one of its characters. The mind constructs a complete reality, then deliberately hides its own authorship. Some philosophers have argued that dreams reveal something fundamental about consciousness itself, not because dreams are more real than waking life, but because they demonstrate how effortlessly awareness can generate experience. The philosopher René Descartes famously asked a question that continues to challenge modern philosophy. How can you ever be absolutely certain that you are not dreaming right now? Whether awake or asleep, your certainty depends entirely on what consciousness presents. If consciousness can create an utterly convincing world during sleep, what guarantees that waking perception is a perfect representation of reality? While dreaming, sensory input from the external world is greatly reduced. During waking life, your brain constantly integrates information arriving through your senses. That makes waking experience far more stable and consistently shared than dreams. But even then, the brain is not passively recording reality. Every color you see, every sound you hear, every face you recognize is constructed from electrical signals. Your ears never hear. They detect pressure waves. Dreams reveal just how extraordinary that assembly process truly is. Because if your mind can generate an entire universe without external input, then consciousness is not merely receiving reality. Perhaps this is why dreams have fascinated every civilization in history. Ancient Egyptians believed dreams carried messages from the divine. Many indigenous traditions viewed dreams as another mode of knowing. Greek philosophers debated whether dreams revealed hidden truths or merely illusions. Modern psychology approaches them differently, seeing dreams as windows into memory, emotion, and unconscious processing. Because dreams force us to confront a question that remains unanswered: if it can invent people, worlds, stories, time, emotion, and identity while you sleep. How much of your waking experience is also being shaped behind the scenes? Because once you realize consciousness is not simply observing reality, but actively constructing your experience of it, you are ready for the next level. the place where most people believe they are finally seeing the world as it truly is, waking life, or at least that's what it feels like. Level 3, the constructed world. Every morning, you open your eyes, and a world appears. Colors flood your vision. Sounds rush in from every direction. After all, millions of other people appear to experience the same world. You cannot rewrite the laws of physics through thought alone. For centuries, philosophers have asked a remarkably uncomfortable question. Are we experiencing reality itself, or only our brain's best interpretation of it? Somewhere between those signals and your conscious experience, something extraordinary happens. It transforms raw information into the rich experience you call reality. Neuroscientists sometimes describe perception not as passive recording, but as active prediction. Rather than waiting for every piece of information to arrive, the brain continuously generates expectations about the world. Incoming sensory information is then compared against those expectations. When reality matches prediction, everything feels seamless. When it doesn't, your brain updates its internal model. This framework, often called predictive processing, has become one of the leading ways neuroscientists understand perception today. It suggests that your experience is an ongoing collaboration between what exists outside you and the brain's best attempt to explain it. Two squares that appear to be completely different shades of gray are, in fact, exactly the same color. It compensates for shadows, lighting, and context to create the most useful interpretation of the scene. Your brain doesn't simply record light. It tries to infer what is most likely happening in the environment. Have you ever noticed how a frightening moment seems to last longer than it actually did? Or how hours disappear when you're completely absorbed in something you love? Time itself is experienced differently depending on attention, emotion, and expectation. If your brain constructs your experience, how much of what you call reality depends on the observer? A bee sees patterns in ultraviolet light that remain completely invisible to us. Pit vipers detect infrared radiation, allowing them to sense heat in darkness. Bats build detailed spatial maps using echoes rather than vision. Migratory birds appear capable of sensing Earth's magnetic field during navigation. Our nervous system reveals only a tiny fraction of the information surrounding us. The visible spectrum represents only a narrow band of electromagnetic radiation. Our hearing covers only a limited range of frequencies. Some cognitive scientists argue that perception functions much like the interface of a computer. When you click an icon on your desktop, you don't see the billions of electrical operations happening inside the machine, not necessarily showing reality exactly as it is, but presenting the information most useful for navigating it. This idea remains an active area of philosophical and scientific debate. Perhaps experience is less like looking through a perfectly transparent window, and more like viewing the world through an extraordinarily sophisticated translation system. This means that even your sense of personal history is continuously being updated, and somewhere in the middle of all that, you experience a seamless story called My Life. Perhaps the most astonishing achievement of consciousness is not that it perceives reality. It is that it transforms unimaginable amounts of sensory information into a single, continuous, coherent experience. Yet beneath that effortless experience, billions of neurons are coordinating one of the most complex processes known in nature. But that perception feels so immediate, so complete, that we mistake our experience of reality for reality itself. Once you recognize that your mind is constantly interpreting the world, another possibility begins to emerge. If consciousness can observe its own perceptions, can it also observe itself? Can awareness become aware of awareness? That question leads us to the fourth level, the observer. Level 4, the observer. For your entire life, your attention has been pointed outward, toward people, places. And because of that, most people spend decades studying everything, except the one thing that makes every experience possible. Right now, as you're listening to these words, thoughts are appearing. Some compare these ideas to things you've heard before, until you ask a question that philosophers and neuroscientists still debate. This simple exercise has fascinated contemplative traditions for thousands of years. Even observe the story you continuously tell yourself about who you are. Halfway through the journey, you suddenly realize you remember almost nothing about the last 10 minutes. Or when we deliberately bring awareness back to the present moment, neuroscience has begun exploring what happens during these moments. Brain imaging studies show that when people intentionally observe their own thoughts, activity often shifts across networks involved in attention, self-reflection, and executive control. Meditation research suggests that experienced practitioners become increasingly skilled at recognizing thoughts without immediately reacting to them. They're upset. I said something wrong. They're ignoring me. Minutes later, you discover their phone battery died. The observer creates space between the event and the interpretation. That space may be one of the most important psychological abilities we possess, because once you realize thoughts are events occurring within consciousness, rather than absolute facts, something changes. But you begin asking, is this true? Or is this simply a thought passing through awareness? This doesn't eliminate suffering. Interestingly, modern psychology has increasingly emphasized this distinction. Approaches such as mindfulness-based therapies and acceptance and commitment therapy encourage people to notice thoughts without automatically identifying with them. But because fusion with every thought can become psychologically exhausting, if every thought represented your true identity, who would you be? Perhaps identity is not the stream of thoughts itself, but the awareness capable of noticing that stream. This idea has intrigued philosophers across cultures. Some have argued that consciousness resembles a mirror. Some philosophers argue that there is no separate observer hiding behind experience, only the experiences themselves, woven together so seamlessly that they create the feeling of a stable self. The moment awareness tries to examine itself, it is both the investigator and the thing being investigated. Yet, despite the mystery, most people have tasted this state, if only briefly. Have you ever watched a sunset, and for a few seconds, the endless internal dialogue simply stopped? Or perhaps while listening to music, walking through a forest, looking at the night sky, holding someone you love, or standing before the ocean, the usual noise of thought became strangely quiet. Consciousness does not always need constant narration to exist. Sometimes, awareness becomes most vivid, precisely when the story about yourself grows silent. If awareness can observe thoughts, what happens when thought itself becomes quiet? Does consciousness become smaller, or does it become something entirely different? That possibility takes us beyond ordinary self-awareness, into states where attention no longer chases every distraction, and the mind begins to reveal capacities most people rarely experience. Welcome to the expanded mind. Level 5. The expanded mind. There are moments when time seems to disappear. Hours pass, yet they feel like minutes. Your actions become effortless. When psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi began studying highly creative and high-performing individuals, he noticed something remarkable. The happiest moments of their lives rarely came from comfort. They appeared while people were completely immersed in meaningful challenges. Attention became so focused that self-consciousness faded. Interestingly, brain imaging studies suggest that during flow, certain regions involved in self-monitoring become less active. Some researchers describe this as transient hypofrontality, a temporary reduction in activity across parts of the prefrontal cortex. Instead of constantly questioning every movement, it allows deeply learned skills to operate with remarkable efficiency. For thousands of years, cultures across the world have developed practices designed to train attention. Today, scientists have begun studying experienced meditators using brain imaging, electroencephalography, and physiological measurements. Long-term meditation is associated with measurable changes in attention, emotional regulation, and awareness of internal experience. Some studies report alterations in activity within the brain's default mode network, a collection of regions often active when the mind wanders, replays the past, or imagines the future. When that activity decreases, many practitioners describe something surprisingly simple. Experiences that usually disappear beneath constant thinking suddenly become vivid again. This doesn't mean meditation unlocks supernatural powers. The scientific evidence supports benefits for many people, including improvements in attention, stress regulation, and emotional resilience. Because when attention becomes steady, people often notice something they had overlooked for years. Without changing anything, simply observe the next 30 seconds of your own thinking, jumping between memory, anticipation, judgment, fantasy, regret, hope, fear. Sometimes, it simply reveals the one that was already there, hidden beneath distraction. History contains countless stories of discoveries emerging, not while people forced solutions, but after they stepped away. A mathematician suddenly understands an impossible equation while walking. A composer hears an entire melody before writing a single note. A scientist wakes with the missing piece of a theory already formed. Meanwhile, unconscious processes continue reorganizing information behind the scenes, but it may have been developing for hours, days, or even years. Much of the mind's most sophisticated work occurs outside deliberate awareness. The conscious self often receives the answer long after the deeper processes have been working quietly in the background. Then, while washing dishes or driving home, the answer simply appears. Moments like these remind us that the conscious mind is not the entire mind. Throughout history, people have interpreted profound states of consciousness in many different ways, but the explanation we give it often depends on culture, belief, and personal interpretation. Distinguishing the experience from the explanation allows us to remain curious without becoming dogmatic. Because the more we explore consciousness, the more one realization becomes impossible to ignore. From the moment you are born, your language, your ideas, your values, your imagination, even your sense of self, are shaped by other minds. Perhaps consciousness is not only personal, perhaps it has always been profoundly collective, and that possibility opens the door to the sixth level, Level 6 collective intelligence. For most of your life, you have probably experienced your mind as something deeply personal, your thoughts, your memories. It feels as though consciousness begins and ends inside your own skull. What if, long before you ever had your first independent thought, millions of other minds had already begun shaping the way you would experience the world. Right now, every idea you're understanding is arriving through words, concepts developed across thousands of years by countless human beings, most of whom you will never know. Even the voice inside your own mind speaks a language you inherited. Before you learned words, your experience of reality was profoundly different, but you couldn't think. Tomorrow will be different. You couldn't ask, "Who am I?" Language didn't simply give you new ways to communicate. Some cognitive scientists argue that language doesn't merely express ideas. Without concepts, many forms of reasoning become almost impossible. How much of what you call your thinking was quietly built by generations of people who lived centuries before you? Even your idea of what it means to be a person, all emerged from countless minds working across history. And yet, today, you carry all of that knowledge without realizing how deeply it shapes your perception. In this sense, human consciousness resembles something extraordinary. Not a collection of isolated minds, but a vast network, constantly exchanging information. This process is sometimes described as collective intelligence, not because humanity thinks with one literal brain, but because groups often solve problems, remember information, and create innovations that no single individual could achieve alone. Only a few decades ago, answering a difficult question might require weeks inside a library. Today, billions of people contribute to an ever-growing network of shared knowledge. One idea sparks another, which inspires another, until entirely new fields emerge. Social emotions can move through populations with astonishing speed. Without realizing it, we often absorb the moods, beliefs, and behaviors of the people around us. Have you ever entered a room where everyone was anxious and felt your own anxiety increase? Or laughed simply because everyone else was laughing? Or adopted opinions, only later realizing you never examined them yourself? Mirror neuron research, while still an evolving area of neuroscience, suggests that observing another person's actions or emotions can activate related neural systems within ourselves. Empathy, learning, imitation, they are woven into the biology of social life. Long before we consciously choose, our brains are already responding to one another. This may explain why ideas can spread through civilizations almost like living organisms. None belong entirely to one person once they enter the collective mind. They become part of humanity's shared cognitive landscape. For the first time in history, human beings have created systems capable of generating language, recognizing patterns, solving complex problems, and assisting in creative work. These systems do not possess human consciousness as far as current evidence indicates. They become tools through which human intelligence can interact, accelerate, and collaborate. If intelligence can become increasingly distributed, what does that mean for the future of consciousness? Will technology merely amplify human thought? The boundaries between individual minds are more permeable than we once imagined. Even the person you become tomorrow will partly emerge from ideas you encounter today. And yet, even collective intelligence leaves one profound mystery unanswered. If billions of minds can connect, exchange, learn, and evolve together, what is the fundamental nature of the awareness that makes all of this possible? That question leads us to the final level, not a conclusion, not an answer, but the deepest mystery we have encountered so far. Level 7, The final mystery. Throughout this journey, we have watched consciousness transform. It disappeared into silence. It dreamed entire universes, not what brain regions become active when experience changes. This question has become known among philosophers of mind as the hard problem of consciousness. The phrase was introduced by philosopher David Chalmers to distinguish two very different kinds of questions. Some questions are extraordinarily difficult, yet they seem solvable. How does attention shift from one object to another? Why should any physical process, no matter how complex, produce subjective experience at all? Billions of neurons exchange electrical and chemical signals every second, but nowhere inside those electrical patterns does anyone find the feeling of sadness. Some philosophers call these private experiences qualia. Science can often explain the mechanisms that accompany experience. That is why consciousness remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in science. Some researchers propose that consciousness arises when information becomes globally available across different brain systems. This idea, known as global workspace theory, suggests that awareness emerges through widespread communication within the brain. Others propose that consciousness depends on how deeply information is integrated. According to integrated information theory, experience may correspond to the degree of integration within a system. These theories generate important predictions and continue to inspire active research. Some neuroscientists believe that as our understanding of the brain improves, the mystery will gradually disappear. Because even if we mapped every neuron, every synapse, every electrical impulse, one question might still remain. They argue that consciousness emerges entirely from physical processes. Others explore panpsychism, the idea that consciousness, in some extremely simple form, may be a fundamental feature of reality rather than something that appears only in complex brains. Still others investigate neutral monism, or other frameworks suggesting that both mind and matter arise from something more fundamental. Throughout history, humanity has repeatedly mistaken the limits of its current knowledge for the limits of reality itself, when the stars looked like tiny lights fixed to a crystal sphere. Perhaps future generations will understand it in ways we cannot yet imagine, or perhaps consciousness will always remain partially beyond explanation. But because every attempt to explain it must already begin within consciousness itself, it is the only mystery through which every other mystery is investigated. But consciousness is the medium through which all exploration becomes possible, because consciousness is not merely another object inside the universe waiting to be discovered. Questions that each generation inherits and passes forward. Perhaps it is learning to remain curious without becoming trapped by easy answers. Because the moment we become convinced that the mystery has ended, we stop looking. And consciousness has always rewarded those willing to keep looking, but inward, toward the silent awareness that has accompanied every moment of your life, every fear, every hope. It has been present through every version of yourself, and perhaps that quiet presence is the closest any of us has ever come to touching the mystery itself. Conclusion. Take a moment and think about where this journey began, with darkness, with the strange disappearance of identity each night. From there, we entered dreams, where the mind became an architect, building entire worlds from memory, imagination, and emotion. We woke into ordinary life, only to discover that perception is not a perfect recording of reality, but an active interpretation shaped by the brain. We turned inward, and found the observer, the remarkable capacity to notice our own thoughts, emotions, and assumptions. We explored moments when consciousness reorganizes itself through focused attention, creativity, and deep presence. We discovered that no human mind develops alone, but is continuously shaped by language, culture, relationships, and the accumulated knowledge of countless generations. And finally, we arrived at the question that still humbles neuroscience, philosophy, and psychology alike. We know that specific brain regions contribute to perception, memory, language, and emotion. We know that changes in the brain often change conscious experience, but whether consciousness is entirely produced by the brain, emerges from its complexity, or reflects principles we do not yet understand, remains one of the greatest open questions in human knowledge. Because every generation inherits mysteries that the previous generation could not solve. Maybe consciousness is not a puzzle waiting for a single final answer. With the courage to admit, I don't know, and then to keep searching. Or perhaps consciousness will always remain partly mysterious because it is the lens through which every explanation is seen. Because once you begin asking these questions, you never experience the world in quite the same way again. The next time you dream, you may wonder how an entire universe appeared inside your mind. The next time you watch a sunset, you may remember that what you experience is the extraordinary collaboration between light, biology, memory, and awareness. The next time you catch yourself lost in thought, you may notice the quiet observer behind the thinking. And the next time someone asks what consciousness is, perhaps the most honest answer will not be a definition. What if the greatest mystery was never hidden somewhere beyond the stars, but has quietly accompanied every moment of your life, waiting not to be solved, but to be explored? Because before there was every scientific theory, every philosophy, every civilization, every language, there was experience. And at the center of every experience, there has always been awareness, not because it is the last mystery, but because it is the one mystery through which all other mysteries are seen, fade to black. The universe may be vast beyond imagination, but the greatest frontier may still be the one looking through your eyes.